Action!
Do you not have any snakeskin cowboy boots?
No, but I was certainly impressed by them. I was Sterling Moss's stunt bottom fairly recently. Yeah, well, that's my second favourite. Well,
Your
yes.
second favourite?
Well, they're
Hold
all
on.
my favourites, really. I have 40 top 10 favourites.
Did your car used to belong to the Russian Prince Boris Sukhanov?
Yes, but the important thing is to not to tell anybody.
Welcome to Vintage Velocity, the podcast from the Vintage Sports Car Club. I'm Laura Plattman, and today I'm here with Duncan Pittaway. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Laura.
Nice
to see you.
Nice to see you
Absolutely.
again.
Good.
Really good to see you. Now, I want to just say, for those listening only, I am sitting here in this cockpit, very squashed in, but it's a huge...
rude saying cockpit.
Can't you say
It's
cockpit?
a rude word. Well, it's a rude word. Sounds rude.
Oh, we'll just go with that.
Okay.
It's a huge, huge cockpit.
That sounds worse.
And
that definitely sounds worse to me,
we're
but
in-
it's just my childish sense of
yeah,
humour.
it's your childish sense of
Sorry.
humour. We're in...
Ollie will edit that out.
No, he won't.
Oh, is
We're
it?
in
Okay.
Duncan's workshop.
Duncan's cockpit.
And I'm surrounded, here we go, this is going to start the whole thing. We're surrounded by all sorts of eclectic cars that together they've got no rhyme nor reason, but then I think what's going to happen in this conversation, Duncan's going to thread them all together
Okay.
and create the story about why he's
doubt
got
it.
these cars. And so for those listening, you'll see behind us lots of tools and motorbikes in the background. But in front of me, I've got photographs of the car that we're sitting in, which of course, for those that are not looking, is the Beast of Turin. So let's begin at the beginning. Now, I met you, first of all, as you just arrived at the Monaco Historic Grand Prix.
Right.
You and
yes.
Tim Dutton had driven down in your Type 35s.
Yeah.
And you came down completely covered in muck. And
that's
your
right.
eyes were just white. You took your glasses off and your eyes were white and you were just completely filthy. And you'd wired up your tie. So it just looked like Gone with the Wind.
I think it's probably oil and probably egg sandwiches that have probably glued it all together rather
And
than
you
wire.
turned up, you had a donor car on a trailer. And you turned up, I think.
I don't remember the joke.
You did have a donor. I'm sure you had a donor.
No, well, there was a friend of ours who followed us down in an E-Type Jag, but we didn't have his sport vehicles because we basically had all our kit. I think Tim had taken some stuff down in a truck, so I was racing on methanol, so we drove down on petrol and then had to take methanol down. But we made sure.
But you turned up and I saw you arrive, and then minutes later the engines were open. You'd threaded all the copper threads. You're tinkling around, putting more oil in, changing the petrol to ethanol, and then about within an hour you're out qualifying.
Yeah, I think it was good. Well, I mean, that wasn't the first time I'd done it. I think very lucky. I mean, really lucky to have a Type 35. I mean, it bought at a time when you could sort of afford to buy them, which is very fortunate, 20 odd years ago. And it was Simon Diffie actually, and Tim. I was working on it at Tim's, restoring the car, and Simon Diffie and Tim said, well, why don't you go to the Monaco Historics? Because the car had been there. I think the first Monaco Historic was in 82 or 83, and my car had been there, and it had been driven down by Patrick Marsh, along with Rodney Felton and a load of the old crew, had driven down from the UK to Monaco and raced and driven home. So I don't think I had a trailer at the time, actually. So it didn't seem any reason why not. And I MOT'd the car, when we had to MOT vintage cars, on the Saturday, and I hadn't quite finished it. So I'd taken it to my local MOT station without any bodywork on. And my MOT guy's really nice. He's sort of used to cars being a bit odd. And he said, isn't this car supposed to have any bodywork? And I said, no, it's a very rare, early Bugatti. They didn't actually have any bodywork. So he gave me an MOT, and I set off to Monaco on the Monday to the ferry.
Gosh.
But it was fine. It's good. I think the first Monaco I did, there was a chap, an Italian there, who was lovely, who had his car for 10 years at that time. And we worked out I'd driven my car more in the previous 24 hours than he had in the previous 10 years. And all my memories of those Monaco historic events were the drive there and back, more so than the event. Well, the track is amazing, and we were all very lucky to race in Monaco. And it's the one track you can't do a track day there because they close it for that event.
I had a lovely conversation with the wonderful Sterling Moss, and he said when he was racing there, they were practicing in the evening, and they were going around, and this woman came running out of her house, and she said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "We're we're practicing. And she goes, well, go practice somewhere else.
No, it's good. I think that says more about the time period rather than anything else. But yeah, no, it's right.
Running out of our house.
Yeah. I was Sterling Moss's stunt bottom fairly recently, which is rather nice. Anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later because I hadn't even got that listed on my list. But I want to start...
Not many people know that.
No, I want to start at the beginning, but very briefly, because I want to really get back here to the current and the present about you fettling and engineering and racing and collecting the cars. But very, very briefly, if it's at all possible, how did you get into collecting, curating and being a custodian of these cars?
I have a slight problem with collecting and curating. I have a slight problem with that. We'll come on to that. My father loved Victorian cars, that's all. So I've got a 1893, albeit it's dated 1896 because of the front axle. So I've got a Salson here, which is a coal-fired steam car, which I've bought fairly recently. But it stems back to my childhood when I was 3 or 4 years old. My father, having pre-1900 vehicles, he always thought that the VSCC was organised vandalism. Because they built specials and raced things and modified things. So my father's old school veteran car club where everything had to be original and perfect and as it was in the day. So, but you get to the point when you're sort of 16, 17 and you don't want to do what your father does because it's not very cool. So I then started racing motorcycles and that's where my racing came from and just not doing what my dad did. But there was a sort of deep-seated interest in early cars.
And had you always fettled with them? He'd always fettled with them, so you'd learn. It's sort of you were always in the workshop with him.
Yeah, my father's hopeless. I mean, love him dearly. He's still around. He'll probably listen to this. And I love him dearly, but he doesn't have the right mentality for old cars. He'd get very cross with them. I take after my mother a little bit, so he'd get very frustrated when something didn't work. I remember one London to Brighton run. We drove down from Lancashire, from the farm in Lancashire. So we'd driven, hours and hours and hours down to London. And my mother and my sister had gone out to see a show, going to have some meal while my father fettled the car. And we came back at about sort of midnight or 11 o'clock. And my father said, right, that's it, we're all off. The car's never going to work. And we drove back to Lancashire from London at about, I don't know, probably left at midnight, got back at 6 in the morning, just because my father couldn't cope with the fact it wasn't right. And he didn't have the right mentality, really. But no, so I think it was the racing, motorcycles actually, because I think even today there's something rather nice about people who drive motorcycles or ride motorcycles, because everybody even now, prepares their own bikes. There's a much more fettling mentality in the motorcycle world and the VSC, but particularly the motorcycle world, more so than the car world. You go to Goodwood or go to even the lesser events, you go to Snetterton on a Saturday afternoon in October, and there'll be lots of car people there, but they'll have a team preparing their cars. Whereas if you go to a motorcycle meeting anywhere really, it's generally the riders are also involved.
Doing it.
Yeah, so I was brought up with that ethos and grew up on a farm, so when the tractor broke or the muck spreader broke, you had to get the welder out and fix it. So
when did you start accruing?
Yes, well, accruing's better. I always think a collector is such a sort of nasty word, really.
Okay,
because
accruing.
Yeah, because the collectors I know are people
that have the museum.
There's that barking collector in America who just buys cars, to suit the letters of the alphabet. Okay. So he collects. They have we only collect French cars. We only have cars that have R in the title. I don't know. It's just something about collectors who they hoard cars as opposed to having. They'll want a car. They'll want a 911 RS lightweight in their collection. They don't care which one it is. They just want one. And it's a box ticking exercise. Whereas mine are all a little bit more.
So we're
specific.
getting on to what cars you have and why you have them. I'm looking around, and for those listening, over on my right-hand side, there's
stage right or stage left.
Stage left. Yeah. We've got a Plymouth Barracuda, which I've seen go around the Goodwood track, and it's just bonkers, and it just slides, and it's great. Yeah. And then on my stage,
it's no good if you want to win.
And on my right, we've got the Salson, the steam car, and then in the other shed, which I can't see, of course, is a Bugatti. But so I'm surrounded by different cars. So which is your first one that you started with? And you did say you had a Frazer Nash
Yes, yeah.
Which you didn't want to keep, or you haven't got any more?
I think it depends. Frazer Nashes are great. When I was first joined the VSCC, I built a special, which is here somewhere, because I fell in love with the Chelsea specials, and it's very close to my motorcycle roots, and there was some crazy chain drive Chelsea specials, and great friends of Mark Walker, and Mark said to me, I remember saying to him, 40 years ago, wouldn't it be great to open a shed and find a Chelsea special? And Mark said, well, you never will, because there aren't any, but you could build one. And I think it's the coming into the VSCC, which is so good about the VSCC, is it allows young, enthusiastic people to not necessarily buy a £200,000 car, but you can go into your shed and you can conceive something of the period, of the spirit of the time when people did race cars in the UK with stuff they built in their shed. So that was opened my eyes. Coming from the Veteran Car Club, where everything had to be, almost original paint, it was so nice to be able to think, well, actually, you could take all these components from the right period, and the VSC will encourage that. So that's what started me with the cars, I suppose. And then it sort of became a bit of an obsession after that, I suppose.
So what was your first one? Your Frazer Nash?
The Hornet.
The Hornet.
It's called the Hornet. And because all Chelsea specials are given the names, not all, but there's a big tradition of naming Chelsea specials after insects, so I thought it would be quite fun. And there was the spider, and there's gnat, and there's wasp, and there's grub, and there's a whole load of original cars. And I thought it would be quite fun. There wasn't a Hornet, so I thought, right, we're going to call this a Hornet.
So then what was your next car?
Well, Frazer Nash was the next one, because as soon as you get into the VSCC, the Frazer Nash section I love it dearly, because it's got that...
They're bonkers.
Yeah, but it's sort of bonkers in a sort of rather cool way. It's not bonkers for the sake of being bonkers. And it's very akin to, again, motorcycles, very akin to stopping at the side of the road and breaking down and fixing and chains and oil and doing your own work. And so there was a definite affinity to how brilliant Frazer Nashes are. So the next thing had to be a Frazer Nash. And I very fortunately borrowed a car. Again, the VSCC are good at this. A friend of mine said, well, do you want to borrow mine for a couple of months? So I borrowed this Frazer Nash for a bit, and I loved it. So I thought, well, that'd be good. So built Frazer Nash. The only difference I had is I don't know. I just thought, I don't like Meadows engines, which probably everyone's going to say, oh God, the Meadows engines, they're brilliant, and how can you possibly say that? But Meadows engines, which is the go-to engine for a Frazer Nash. Frazer Nash fitted a whole variety of engines, but the go-to engine is the Meadows. And I know that people make them go very well, and they're very fast, and probably fast Frazer Nashes, but they're an uninspiring lump of iron. I'm sure people who actually love them probably secretly admit they're not very exciting. So I wanted a Frazer Nash, but not with a Meadows engine. And then another conversation with Mark over a beer in a pub was, what if you're going to build a Frazer Nash? Because I couldn't afford an original one, so I had to buy bits and pieces. And I heard there was a Frazer Nash in the 30s that had been fitted with a Bugatti engine, a straight 8 Bugatti engine. So I thought, well, how cool will that be? And I have Mark and Nick Leston was there, and they all say, yeah, well, you'll never find a Bugatti engine. And I remember thinking, well, why not? I'm a great one for being perhaps overly optimistic, but I did find a Bugatti engine, and I did fit it to a Frazer Nash, and I built the car, and it was great. Sadly, people with Nash section will appreciate this. I think you're either a Gn person or a Frazer Nash person, and I think over that course of time, I'd also acquired 2 GNs, and GNs are somehow more. There's somehow something a little bit more charming about GN than there is about a Frazer Nash. And also, I needed to pay some money off the mortgage of the house, and so the Frazer Nash went.
And then what happened after that? What was the next one?
Well, it didn't happen in sequence, but I suppose...
What was you sort of amalgamating at the same?
I suppose it wasn't... the Bugatti was another thing. My father... I'd been taken to Prescott as a child. My father was always obsessed with Bugattis, and that rubs off on you. And I was given my father had lots of books on Bugattis. So, and I had a friend of mine's father had a Type 35. And so I used to joke with him. I was building the Bugatti engine for the Frazer Nash, and I'd go and spend a lot of time with this chap. And I joked with him about having first refusal to buy his Type 35. I had no money. I had no money at all. And he rang me up one day and said, oh, well, I don't want to sell it now. And I said, good. So but I had no money. But a friend of mine had some money I was in business with. So I persuaded him to buy the car. And he said, well, we'll go 50-50. So
amazing.
So that's got me into
what a
the
stroke
car,
colour.
which is amazing. So that it's sort of Bugattis now are outrageously expensive. But at the time, it was sort of like buying a house, but you only had to buy half of it. And so it was sort of manageable somehow. And I sold the Frazer Nash, sold a couple of other bits and pieces, bought half the Frazer Nash. Half the Bugatti.
Yeah.
And that sort of got me onto the Bugatti chain. And then, as it turned out, I bought another one. Well, my friend bought me out of his car, and then I still had half the money to buy another one. So
I see. So that's not your original Bugatti.
No. Well, when you own a car together, it's great. It's brilliant because I wouldn't have bought the car. Neither of us would have bought the car if we hadn't split it. And it was fine. We didn't fall out about it, but we both then fell in love with it and we wanted to buy each other out.
Yeah, you wanted to drive it and keep it.
And the only solution was finding another one. So he then bought me out of my half, and then I had half the money to buy the other one. So.
And so, I mean, when I look around your workshop, you have different cars from different eras, and it just occurs to me that you really love racing, love showing the cars, love being at every single different event possible. And so you have to have these completely different age ranges and different sorts of cars so you can actually attend and race and compete in completely different circumstances all the time.
Yeah, I think everybody, even people listening, I think people with VSCC will admit, the VSCC is quite a good example of this, because there are people who race in 50s and 60s cars, also have 20s cars, also do the London Brighton. I think car enthusiasts are a fairly eclectic bunch, and whilst I'm possibly not wedded to the more modern supercar market, just because it doesn't suit me or doesn't light my fire, but equally I can appreciate that. But I think I think a lot of us have a broad spectrum of interests, and I went to I think racing is good. I have a problem with V8s. I think V8s are great. So American cars particularly.
You have a problem with V8s. You think V8s are great.
Yeah, they're just amazing things. That there's nothing wrong with a Jaguar engine or a Porsche engine. They're just 2 cylinders short of a decent engine. That's all.
What have you got in the Plymouth?
A V8. Yeah.
Right.
And the Cheetah and the camper van and my Range Rover. But no, there's just something very magical about them.
Where did you find the Plymouth?
I need to credit Tim Dutton for this. We did there used to be a stroke association day at Castle Combe, and a friend of mine, Julian Baum, has a Ford Falcon, and I was there with some, I don't know, Frazer Nash or something. We were just giving people rides at Castle Combe to raise money for the stroke association, and during the day I fell in love with this Ford Falcon that Julian was driving, and Julian gave me a trip round in this Falcon, and I just thought it was fantastic. And it wasn't so much I didn't want a Falcon. I suppose all the things I have are much more, they're special to me. And I never really liked Fords very much. So I was with Tim, and we were in the pub. There's a bit of a theme to my decisions about cars.
Yeah, quite dangerous, really.
But we were in the pub, and I said to Tim, we had really fell in love with the idea of a V8 saloon car. But didn't really want a Ford. And Ford were the dominant manufacturer, then Falcons, Mustangs, Galaxies. And Tim said, well, Plymouth raced a Barracuda. In fact, Richard Petty raced the Barracuda. And I've always quite fancied Richard Petty. I mean, not sexually, obviously, but, well.
He's the chap with the hat.
He's the man with the Stetson, the king, and the snakeskin cowboy boots.
Yes.
Anyway, which are troublesome, but
do you not have any snakeskin cowboy boots?
No, I don't think I want any, but I'm certainly impressed by them. I've got some lederhosen, but that's a different thing. That's for a different.
We're going different countries.
Yeah, but so I fell in love with it, and Tim said, "What about Barracuda?" And I think it's not because it was different. I just liked the fact it wasn't a Ford, and so I built a Barracuda. But it's only a copy of Richard Petty's car. It was probably driven to the shops by an old lady in its youth.
So you have done a lot to it.
Yes, probably too much.
You've raced it up.
Yeah, probably too much. 20 years now. Probably too much. And Spa, you get to go to some amazing events. And because we do the work here, I mean, Steve's here today, but we do the work here. I do the work in the workshop and build my own engines. So I think, I always think it's funny, you get to a race meeting and I always get that sort of imposter syndrome, because you see people there with their cars prepared by teams and, you know, unlimited budgets. And I'm there sort of fettling the thing, thinking, perhaps I shouldn't be here. But the Barracuda is great fun.
You say that perhaps you shouldn't be here, but then when we see you race, you're up there. You're in the mix. Your
Possibly
podiums,
not the Barracuda.
quite a few podiums. Maybe not with Barracuda, but when you know.
The problem with the Barracudas is it's too heavy.
And also,
Ford had a massive racing program.
Also, aren't you competing with people like Tom Christensen in that race?
Yeah,
absolutely.
And who's Tom Christensen? What's he ever done?
He just eats cars up as he goes along. He could be in the slowest car and he just goes chomp, 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 chomp all the way around the track.
Yeah, I mean, there are. I mean, the thing is, if you had one car, you could work on it and perfect it. And the Barracuda gets rolled out. I do hopefully 2 or 3 races a year with this, so it doesn't get raced as much as it could. And you get to the point where I just can't spend any more money on it, pursuing that extra half a second. And the problem with the Cuda is that in periods until today, Ford took the Mustang and the Falcon and the Galaxy, and they raced them prolifically in the 60s and developed them. And they added lots of things legal. They did lots of modifications that the FIA allowed them to do. So here we are, I don't know, 60 years later, and you can use all those modifications, plastic, fiberglass wings, fiberglass boots, fiberglass bumpers, those sort of things, which you can do with the Fords, but Chrysler never developed their cars. Oh, so my car weighs...
Got to just drill in holes everywhere.
Well, you can't do that. And so you're restricted by what was done in the day, so you end up with a car that is probably 3 very large men, sort of fat people. I can't say that probably, but you're probably 200 or 300 kilos heavier than a Mustang.
Overweight people.
I mean, if you want to win, it's about weight. It's all about racing. Is all about lightweight. And so, if you want to win, you really need a Falcon or a Mustang.
So we've talked about.
We came 10th last year.
I mean, there was a big race. There was a full grid. I mean, 10th, you're in the mix.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're completely in the mix. And with the people that you're racing against, you're in the mix.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's good.
And it's good fun.
It's brilliant.
And it's amazing fun watching with a zoom lens, looking through the window at elbows and faces. It's just brilliant. The excitement of your faces through this little gap of the windshield of your helmet. It's brilliant.
Well, even towards the back of the grid. I mean, I'm not at the back of the grid all the time, but even towards the back of the grid, we're all racing pretty hard. And a friend of mine came to share the car who hadn't raced for a few years. He couldn't believe how fast the grid was at Goodwood. And I think certainly outside the UK, I think we're the centre of historic motorsport in the world, in the UK. And I think people look upon it a little bit elsewhere, like a sort of extension of a Concours d'Elegance competition.
Oh no!
Well, a little bit in America. Certainly, it's very polite to race in America, and there's no overtaking unless you wave through. A bit like track day rules.
Yeah.
But in the UK, it's not, and it's a much better for that. But it's quite surprising, I think, to some people.
It is surprising, and there's just one a little notch down from absolute proper full-on racing, isn't it? Because everyone's trying to look after the cars a little bit.
And also, there's no formula. So in all the races at Goodwood and all the races at the Salson Classic and everywhere, even Monaco, you've got a grid of cars that are a period, probably 10 years. So whatever you're doing, if you happen to be in a car that's at the beginning of that period, you're never going to beat the car that's at the end of that period. So regularly in the Type 35, in a race at Goodwood, I'm in a 1925 car racing against a 1933 car. I mean, I can sometimes beat them, but generally, in historic racing, you're stuck with the car you've got
and with that
is out of period to your competitors, which is fine. But then historic racing, you're not going to get, Adrian Newey's not going to phone you up and offer you a drive in Red Bull. So there's no money to be earned. So the thing is to enjoy your race within the race. So Revival this year, I've got a new co-driver, and I was talking to her the other day, and I said the thing is, we're not going to win in the Barracuda because it's too heavy and it's not competitive enough.
But you're going to have a jolly good time.
But what we can do, with a bit of luck, is you end up having a really good race within the race. So last year we got a really good dice. I came 10th overall, but you have 3 or 4 cars. It doesn't really matter where you are in the race, but you have a really good race with the
close
people.
Race with your people.
Yeah, and that's the best you can hope for with historic racing, I think.
And now I want to move on to the car that's behind my left shoulder, which is stage right.
My favourite.
And that's the Cheetah Bullet Chevrolet.
Cheetah, yeah, well that's my second favourite. Well,
your second favourite?
Well, they're all my favourites, really.
Where am I? Oh, that one. Oh, sorry, yeah. I'm thinking behind.
Behind you, yeah, absolutely,
behind me.
Fine.
Now the Cheetah Bullet Chevrolet. Is it right that it was named the Bullet because of the drum brakes of the Japan bullet train?
I think
Is that a bit of a myth
I
from
think
somewhere that I've read somewhere?
Your research has got a bit awry. No.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, it's
God,
fine.
I was like, what?
It's really the Bill Thomas Cheetah. Bill Thomas worked for Chevrolet as the same way Carroll Shelby worked for Ford. So Carroll Shelby in 62 or 61, 62 approached Ford, and Ford at the time, Ford, General Motors and Chrysler all had agreed not to race. Well, to withdraw from racing, because there was quite a lot of backlash about accidents, of young people having accidents on the road, and it was quite a religious. There's quite a religious element to that, and the sort of high ups at all those three companies decided that promoting speed probably wasn't ethical, and they should withdraw from racing. But of course, all those companies had a racing department. And all the individuals in the racing department think, oh, well, no, well, we want to still race. We can't not. What have we got to do? So, for example, Ford approached Carroll Shelby, and in America, the AC Cobra was known as the Cobra powered by Ford. So it wasn't a Ford project, it was Shelby's project. And Chevrolet, the same. They'd been racing Corvettes. And Bill Thomas had worked with Chevrolet, like Shelby, advising them, building engines, advising on the race program they had. And they approached Bill Thomas and said, look, we'll set you up in a factory. If you can build these cars, we'll buy the 100 that we've got. We'll commit to buying the 100 cars that you've got to build for homologation, and then you race them as Bill Thomas Chevrolet Cheetahs. So
That's one of 11, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
They didn't build a lot.
One of two actually. I mean, 2 aluminium ones.
Oh.
Yeah. But then, so that was the sort of concept behind racing at the time. And Shelby had done really well. I mean, he did phenomenally well. He'd gone from being a very successful racing driver, but no money, to being basically launching the Cobra and basically winning everything in 62 and 63. And the car he was beating was the Corvette. And with Bill Thomas's help, they built, I think 5 or 6 super lightweight Corvettes to try and beat the Cobra, and they weren't good enough. They weren't light enough. So Bill Thomas approached Chevrolet and said, we can build a car to beat the Cobra. And they built 2 aluminium body prototypes, and Chevrolet assessed one and said, yes, we like the whole concept. And the plan was, this was in 63, and the plan was for the 64 season to start racing the cars, and during the season they had to build 100 to be accepted as production sports cars.
Yeah.
So that was easy to do, and so Chevrolet agreed for Bill to build 100. The 100 were going to be fiberglass bodied because it was quicker to make them with fiberglass bodies than aluminium, and they started making them. The downfall was when Bondurant and Jerry Titus went testing at the end of 63 in the prototype cars. This is one of the prototypes. They went faster than the Cobras, and there was a bit of a bit of gossip in the press about, look out, Shelby next year, Bill Thomas is coming with the Cheetah, sort of banter you get in the motoring press. And there were 3 Cheetahs entered for Daytona in February 64. None of them finished because they were undeveloped. I mean, they had all sorts of niggly problems. But by March 64, the FIA changed the rules. And the FIA changed the rules from building 100 cars to be production to 1,000 cars.
Oh, no.
And Chevrolet just pulled the plug. That was the end of it. So that killed the project. And at that time, Bill had only built 10 cars. They built, 9 fiberglass ones.
And so...
Plus the aluminium prototypes.
So that car hasn't been raced since the late 60s?
No, well, it was raced at Daytona, and then it was crashed, but it not crashed badly. And so it, just like... This, you've got to think about this as sort of hot rodders working in a shed in California. This isn't a big factory-funded project. And just like Shelby built the first Daytona Coupe out of a crashed Roadster, Bill Thomas took the chassis number 1 from the crash at Daytona, took it back to the factory, repaired the chassis, and then started rebodying it and modifying it to make it into the Mark II version, like the Daytona Cobra, but never finished it. Just never finished the car. So all of chassis number 1, the whole of chassis number 1 car was locked into this sort of part-built Mark II version, and that's because the Cheetah project died in 64, the end of 64. And then there was a factory fire and a fallout, and Chevrolet pulled all the funding. The whole project collapsed. They never finished the prototype car. The prototype car was sold, and remarkably, the chap who bought it in '69 didn't do anything with it at all. So it stayed intact as an intact chassis number one car, locked into this sort of partially built prototype until 2015. So,
and that's when you found it. You found it after that.
There's a great guy.
Can I just interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, sure.
For those listening who might have forgotten we're sitting in the workshop, there is work going on in the Plymouth, and I can hear it at the minute. So if it's annoying you guys listening, you just have to go with it, because the diffs are being de-oiled and deplugged and everything.
We've got to set the gearbox out. Yeah.
The gearbox is coming out. So basically, there is a bit of noise. So just cope with it. Carry on.
Well, it's just that I think it was just. There's a lovely chap, a remarkable chap called Bob Auxier. The Americans are great. I do love the Americans. I love the American racing history.
Well, that was you.
That was my phone. And I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding in Europe about American racing. American racing is fantastic. Road racing particularly. Everybody thinks of Americans just went drag racing, but they were very clever. Anyway, Bob Auxier is Mr. Cheetah in America, and he knew Bill Thomas really well, and they built a whole series of continuation cars. But more importantly, Bob understands the original cars, because there aren't many, and he's basically restored all the significant Cheetahs. And he knew about the Super Cheetah or the Mark II version, and so I got to know Bob, and I just said that I sort of set a mission. I thinking, well, that's the car to restore. The original chassis number one with its original bodywork is got to be the one to restore. And so I sort of set my heart on that. And Bob was great. He was very helpful. He's been brilliant, and he eventually persuaded to sell me the car.
And that came from Arizona, did it?
Yeah. All the Cheetahs in America, really. So it was a bit of again, coming back to my collector thing. It wasn't any Cheetah. It was that particular Cheetah. And there's something lovely about the original aluminium bodywork, and there's something lovely about the history of that car. It had no race history really, because it only raced once and crashed. Chassis number two, the other aluminium car, which Bob has got a far more illustrious history than my car. But
I saw you race that last September at Goodwood, and you and your co-driver sort of decided to retire the car.
Well, he did.
Okay.
And I don't blame him, actually. I don't blame him at all.
And was
it's his call.
Was it to do with parts brakes beginning to tire as well?
No, the brakes are a problem, because Chevrolet didn't have a disc brake in '63. Because it was going to be a production car, they didn't have a production disc brake. So the car does have drum brakes, which is a bit alarming for a 170 mile an hour car.
Which does start to go on your mind a bit when you've got that chicane and then the straight and then
Goodwood's not too bad.
Curve.
It's not too bad, because there's only one heavy braking point at Goodwood. Silverstone, last October, that was a bit tricky, because there's on the Grand Prix circuit there's three. But it wasn't so much that. In fairness, Stuart Graham is my hero, who I shared the car with at Goodwood. He is absolutely my hero. He's won motorcycle Grand Prix. He's won saloon car races. He was the man in a Camaro in the 70s. I think Stuart's really fast. The problem with the Cheetah is it's a bit odd, because it's a front-engine GT car, but when Bill built it, he was conscious of the weight distribution of the GT40 and the rear-engine cars, but it had to be front-engine, it had to be two seats, it had to have a spare wheel. So you moved the engine as far back as it would go. So I'm very lucky. I've raced a Cobra, and the Cobras are really quite lovely to race. They're fairly benign if they're set up right. The Cheetah isn't. It's just a bit odd. I'm getting used to it now. And our lap times would have put us midfield-ish at the Revival, sort of 26s, that sort of 26, 1 minute 27s. So we're never going to win, because the car's, again, it's unique and it's not modified. But
it's a good race.
Well, Stuart doesn't test, because he doesn't need to test. He's a sort of driving god. So I said, Stuart, do you want to come testing? He said, no. Anyway, after the first qualifying on Friday, he did say, it's quite a challenge, that car. Because in a straight line, it's very fast. I think it was the second fastest car over the speed trap at Goodwood. But its handling is a bit weird. So it was forecast to rain on Sunday. That's the thing. So, and it started raining during my session. I did the start of the race. And Stuart did say, I feel I need to park the car if it starts really raining hard. And it did, absolutely tipped down. Then there were cars going off everywhere.
Lucky.
And there was a red flag, and I think Stuart thought, absolutely the right call. It's his call.
Yeah.
It's all about protecting the car.
And
you
now,
don't want to, you look like an idiot if you bury it in the wall.
And now the car is ready to be fettled again, get ready to race again. And is that going to Goodwood again?
Yes, in September. Yeah.
So
I'm hoping Abby Eaton will share with me, because Abby's great, and she's the sort of, people don't know, she's a fantastic racing driver. I don't think there are enough women at Goodwood, that's by the by. And she was the Grand Tour stick. She took over when the boys moved to Amazon. So, but she races.
I think she'll have a laugh with that.
Well, I hope so. I do hope so. We're waiting for Goodwood to prove it, but I hope so. And I think she'd be a fantastic addition to the team. It's quite funny at Goodwood. I think it's right the way they do it, but you're expected obviously to share the car with somebody. And I've been really fortunate for the last 8 years, I suppose, sharing with Ryan Atkinson, who's become a great friend. And so that's been lovely, because we have the same mentality about looking after the car, and we're not necessarily there to win. We appreciate the limitations of the cars. So he's shared the Barracuda with me for, like I say, 7 or 8 years, and I've shared his Jaguar.
That's right, because, excuse me, because I remember seeing his face just by the chicane, and his excitement as well. You can just see, I love that.
What are you saying about his face? You think he's got a funny face?
No, but you can see.
You are, I'll tell you.
You can see the helmet, you can see the crow's feet of laughter and excitement.
He's really good.
That's what I mean, the actual physicality of your face because we can see really close at the chicane.
I see, when you're zooming in.
Yeah, where as a photographer, you can really see
like
the action happening inside the cockpit. It's just so exciting, and he's just coming around to the chicane. You think, oh my God, he's having fun.
Well, Brian's great. I mean, he raced. I mean, people. It's so lovely to have got to know him as a friend, but he's nothing like the persona you think he is, like a lot of actors and comedians. But the cool thing about Rowan is he really understands that it's about the car. It's not about winning. And so at Goodwood, when you're teamed up with somebody, it's been a very fortunate time for me with Rowan, because I've had a few difficult co-drivers who treat the car really badly to get that extra 2/10, albeit the car isn't going to win anyway. And you're thinking, wow, do you really need to go for the gap that isn't there?
I think Abby will be great.
Yeah, no, I'm certain
she wants to have a super time and really enjoy driving cars that she
drives historics as well. She drives a Mustang. She was driving a Holden last weekend, so 5-litre Holden. So I'm hoping it'll be good. But like I say, it is good what Goodwood do. And it's very exciting for the spectators. And also, it's an education for a lot of the owners, how fast the cars can go.
Now, we need to move on, because we've got 2 cars that I really want to talk about.
Right.
And we haven't got that much time.
No, well, I have, but you obviously...
So, we're going to carry on. Now, the penultimate car that we're going to talk about...
Are you always this demanding?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the penultimate car that we're going to talk about was going to be your favourite car.
Yes. I have a number of favourites.
Okay.
I have 40 top 10 favourite
Are
films.
they allowed to be, because they're not all your children?
Oh, it's a bit of a sort of cliche.
But we're going
oily things.
We're going to talk about the car we're sitting
Okay.
in, because I want to talk about the Salson afterwards, I think.
Good old beast of Turin.
But we're going to sit here. We're in a Fiat.
Yes.
And it's commonly known as the Beast of Turin.
Yeah, I think it was called that in period, actually. So.
And 2 of them made.
Yes.
Nazaro tested the first one.
Well, Nazaro was the Stefan. What's his name? What's the current driver? What's his name? Oh, good Lord, I can't think of that. He was that Lewis Hamilton of Fiat. You know, he was the man. He was probably the most important member of the Fiat racing team. I think Nazaro was a sort of god to the Italian teams.
Now, a little bit about the car, which you'll completely go over properly. It was built for the 1910 speed record.
Not really.
Okay.
No.
You're going to carry on as that.
I carry on contradicting. It's fine. It's fine.
You're going to correct me. 28.4 litre.
Yep.
147.6 inches long.
Oh, I don't. That's very good, Lord.
I've
no
researched.
idea.
Research.
I have no idea.
Research.
Okay.
290 horsepower.
300.
Yep.
Yeah, 300 horsepower.
4
Well,
cylinders.
Fiat listed at 300 horsepower anyway. It's commonly misquoted, but it was 300 horsepower, 1,000 revs, which is the most remarkable thing.
But wasn't it a speed car that was held in the air by the bits and bends?
Sort of, but
Okay, explain it.
Well, there was lots of racing. From the turn of the century, there's lots of races. Almost road races, very few circuit races, but there were lots of between city road races. And then the French in 1906 decided to have the Grand Prix, and it was just one race, and it was held by the French. And in 1906, the French won it. I think Marcel Renault won it in a Renault, and so they thought, that's good. And they had all the manufacturers enter. And so they did another Grand Prix in 1907, and the French won that. So they thought, that's great.
French.
I know. So in 1908, they held another Grand Prix, and the Mercedes won it, the Germans won it. And so in 1908, the French said, we're not doing that again. So there was no Grand Prix. There was no Grand Prix in 9, 10, 11, because the French didn't have a car to beat the Mercedes. So they didn't have a Grand Prix. I mean, there were other races. It's not like today when the Grand Prix is the central focus of racing. So it was just another race. It was a big race, but it was just another race. But the French decided not to do
A car they weren't going to win.
They weren't going to win.
Race they weren't going to win.
But the thing about the French Grand Prix, or the Grand Prix, is that there was a formula attached to it, which was new in those days, because basically up to that point you could race what you liked. So the manufacturers, having got into the Grand Prix thing about building cars to a formula for 3 years, they were suddenly released. So in 1909, there was no Grand Prix, and so there was no formula, there was no structure. So Benz built the Blitz and Benz. It was a 200 horsepower Benz. So they built this. They took their concept of racing, just like I was saying about the Americans. When the management decided not to go racing, the people in the racing department thought, "No, solve that.
We're going racing."
Exactly. So they wanted to do it. So, and just like today, all the manufacturers built a new car over the winter. They didn't take touring car chassis and put aero engines in. I mean, they did that. Privateers did that after the First War. But they basically built bespoke racing cars every year. And so there were Benz with no Grand Prix, no formulas. So the guys thought, well, we'll build the fastest car on the planet. And they put a 21-litre four-cylinder engine into their next 1909 car. And lo and behold, it was bloody fast. And they won. They raced it. They broke records with it. But they didn't build it to beat records. They just built it to be the fastest car. And they hill climbed it. They did loads of stuff with them. And they were just very successful. And they got a lot of publicity. And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that Fiat saw this publicity and thought, well,
hello,
sod this, we can do better than that. So they took the S74, the previous year's S74, which is a 14.25 litre 4, and just doubled the size of it. Because how better to go faster than put a bigger engine in? You know, they'd done that for years, because in 1907 they started with a 10-litre engine. 1908 they went to a 14-litre engine. Why not just? And then Benz put a 21-litre engine. Every time you put a bigger engine, it goes faster. So they just doubled it to 28.5.
So
and it was faster. I mean, it was really fast.
So it was tested by Nazzaro.
Yeah, I don't know whether
he said the car was uncontrollable.
I don't know. See, the Nazzaro, the documentation is a bit sketchy because I remember it was lovely. I proved Bill Body, who was he's the source of all pre-war, pre-Second World War racing sort of facts, was lovely, and he wrote a book about this car, or he was referencing his book, and he basically said it was fitted with an airship engine. And in my research, I found out it definitely wasn't. The airship engine came 2 years later, and it's quite different, blah, blah, blah. So I remember corresponding with Bill at the time, and Bill was lovely. I don't profess to know him, but I wrote to him, and he rang me up. And it was like getting a call from the Queen. It was really weird. Not that he is a Queen. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't. He was probably a perfectly normal. Well, say normal, perfectly
get out of your rabbit hole.
Perfectly acceptable sexual preferences. But he was lovely, and he was very excited that I found this research. I sent him all these photographs and all my research, and he accepted it completely. And I said, where did the whole sort of rabbit sort of warren story of it being an airship engine? And he said there was a journalist called W.F. Bradley who was around at the time when all these raced. He was around at the turn of the century. And he was probably he was the most important British journalist who wrote about, the race of death in 1903 and the first Grand Prix. He was there, and so by the time Bill knew him in the 30s when he took over motorsport, Bradley was pretty old. He was pretty gaga, and he was pissed most of the time because he was very famously, he drank a lot of wine, and a lot of the documentation he wrote about at the time for a whole variety of subjects was proved to be slightly factually incorrect. So Bill just said, "Oh well, I was a young man. I believed W.F. Bradley because of who he was, but basically he never let the truth get in the way of a good story." So he was very understanding. But coming back to the Fiat, I think so. Nazzaro was already thinking about. He set up his own company, Nazzaro Manufacturing Company, in 1914. So I think, in fairness to Felice, he was already got his eye to leaving Fiat, with Fiat's blessing, to build his own cars.
And he's got his idea about it.
Yeah, and I think there's pictures of him testing the car when it was first built, very early 1911. But really, Pietro Bordino, who was the sort of young lad, he was the sort of the coming man in terms of the works drivers. He drove it. He was the one who drove it. He loved it.
But they said, well, I found in my research, which is proving to be drunk history, that he only raced it up to 90 miles an hour.
Well, it could well be. I mean,
it could be more drunk history.
No, it could well be. There was a road between. I can't think of the two towns now. There was a very famous road on the outskirts of Turin, which Fiat used. Lots of companies used for testing. It was a very straight road up to the mountains. It could well be. I think but Bordino is the man who drove it. He raced it. He brought it here to the UK. He brought it to Brooklands, and it was supposed to go on a truck. There was a fairly detailed article in the Autocar, written by somebody who was sober, and they wrote about Bordino coming to the UK with the car in July 1911, and it was supposed to go on a truck. It was entered at Brooklands. They didn't race it at Brooklands, and I don't know why. But I think it's partly because Brooklands was notoriously bumpy. I mean, it was notoriously dangerous. Burkett was pilloried later in his life when he wanted Brooklands banned. He wanted it scrapped because it was lethal. But also noise. The other thing was probably the noise, because there's a sort of anecdotal evidence of a chap who was at Brooklands while Bordino was driving around, and he said he'd hear thunder and lightning as the car came round. So, and Brooklands was very early on being very conscious of noise. The Brooklands canisters, the Brooklands silencers. So I think it was probably the noise that stopped them entering a race at Brooklands. But it was supposed to go from Brooklands to Saltburn, Middlesbrough, for the big international Saltburn meeting. It was supposed to go on a lorry. And Bordino famously said, "No, I want to drive on the road." He said it was as nice to drive as the new 12 horsepower model. And they registered it for the road and drove it from London to Middlesbrough and drove it back again.
Up the A1?
Yeah, I don't know what the roads would be. There was there's in the same article, in the Autocar, they talk about seeing 120 miles an hour on the speedo, somewhere between Oxford and Banbury. So at the time,
Oxford and Banbury. I'm visualising Oxford and Banbury, and I can just see roundabout after roundabout.
Well, obviously not on the day.
Oh no, they didn't have roundabouts then. Roundabouts were from the 70s. Oh, what am I talking about?
Rubbish again. Pissed again.
Drunk history.
But it was remarkable that they would drive this stuff on the road and at great speed, but didn't say anything about it. But I think it was. Well, I now know it is lovely to drive. I've done 6,000-7,000 miles of it.
Did your car used to belong to the Russian Prince Boris Sukhanov?
Yes, of the two cars, there's a guy called Sukhanov. He was extremely wealthy. I think prior to the revolution, I didn't know, because my perception of Russia was all sort of lots of grey bearded people with sort of very grey hats and desperately sort of, I suppose, the post-revolution era of Russia, which has a pretty dire sort of dour image. But prior to 1913, 13-14.
I can just imagine silk embroidery and flowers and feathers.
It was astonishingly wealthy.
And lots of wonderful hats.
Yeah.
And
it was Paris fashions, it was huge amounts of wealth, which is probably why there was a revolution, because of the abject poverty. But so Sukhanov, who was was a member of the very, very vast, extended royal family in Russia. I think there were an awful lot of them. And he collected cars. He had loads of them. He had certainly 10 or 15 very interesting historic cars, some of which have survived. And he approached Fiat. I've got photographs of him test driving the car, which we know is at the end of 1911. So I think he approached Fiat to buy the record car, because the car did break the world flying mile record at Saltburn officially. So it was officially awarded the flying mile record, but not the slightly faster flying kilometre record.
And so he commissioned Arthur Duray to...
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
To break...
2 years later.
To break the record.
Well, the car, there wasn't, I don't think...
Not a record, but I mean to get the car to be as fast as it could.
Well, there were two records. There were two, I mean, there were lots of, there are today lots of land speed records, but the ultimate land speed record is the one we all talk about. But in the day, there were two. There was the flying kilometre and the flying mile. Those were the two premier records. And the Fiat had the flying mile, but it didn't have the flying kilometre.
And so, from my reading, and I think it's all from Drunk History, of course, now. That's what, my book is Drunk History. I might just relabel it Drunk History.
A bit of a theme there as well, I think, by the sound of it.
But he got it to, in 1913, he got it to 132, but not both ways. And then he didn't get it completely because it was unofficial, because he was meant to have got back within the hour and he didn't get it.
Yeah, and it seems to be, it's like the ugly duckling story with this car, really, because it was definitely fast enough. It broke the flying mile record was slightly slower than the flying kilometre record, because it's been beaten by the Blitz and Benz at Brooklands, and if over the kilometre they had to achieve the mile, they had to lift off to go around the banking. So the mile record average was slightly slower than the kilometre record, because there wasn't enough straight at Brooklands to do without lifting off a little bit towards the end. So. And the Blitz and Benz, I think it was the flying kilometre record, the faster one was 125, 126. So the Fiat went to Saltburn Sands in 1911 to break those two records. But it was an unusually wet year at Saltburn. So there's reports of cars sinking into the sand. This car sunk into the sand. There's reports of cars weaving on the beach. I mean, racing on the beach is nothing like racing on the concrete at Brooklands. So all they achieved was 119 miles an hour. All they achieved was 119 miles an hour, and that was fast enough officially to break the world flying mile record. But they only had to go one way in 1911. But the rules changed. The Benz only gone one way, but the rule changed when it got to 1913. So it was a bit harsh that the rules had changed, so they had to do it differently.
They have to come back both ways.
Yeah.
Now
but it wasn't their fault.
Here's the bit where I started laughing a couple of weeks ago, when I was sitting in a rugby club in Gloucester with 20 other people.
Were you drinking?
With 20 other people. We're just waiting for a car to come down. The Barracuda to come down off the ramp. But I was sitting in a rugby club with 20 other people, looking at red circles and red triangles on a wall, looking at dual carriageways and.
You hadn't been speeding,
single roads. And so I was looking at, and then there was a speed camera turned up on one of the pictures, and I just started laughing. But I wasn't laughing at my contemporaries sitting around me. I was laughing at you, because I'd heard that you wanted to do the speed record and catch a speed camera to catch your speed.
Well, I just think that it wasn't the car's fault that it didn't break the record, and because you had to go two ways in the hour, not one way. It was officially timed. The Europeans, the French, actually orchestrated the record attempts in Europe. Were very, very strict, and it all had to be electrically timed. You couldn't do stopwatches. The Americans were pretty relaxed. They would do everything with stopwatches, and they'd claim outrageous speeds on their stopwatches. But the French were very, very strict, so they would lay out all this electronic timing apparatus. And the Fiat was, as you said, recorded officially 132 and a half miles an hour, something else, over the measured mile average. And Duray wrote about it afterwards, saying it was the fastest car he'd ever driven. I mean, he was a very experienced driver, and he said it used all his years of experience to drive it in full throttle in third gear, and it needed the courage of 1,000 men to drive it in full throttle in fourth gear. And he said that he had a man stationed on the beach with a flag. It was more about stopping than going, and it was an 11-kilometre stretch of tarmac, alongside the beach, Europe's largest nudist beach, by the way.
What, at the time?
Well, possibly not at the time, but it certainly is now. A lot of very large
Oh,
Germans.
now.
Anyway, but I'm sure there's some very slim Germans as well. But anyway, that's
Here we
by the
go
way.
again.
Yes, we're going to get into all sorts of trouble. But
Let's just call it drunk history.
But he said as he was leaving the measure, obviously it was an average over the mile. As he was leaving the measure mile, he said it was doing well over 140. So he thought. But it was officially timed exactly the same as the Benz, one way, and it's considerably faster. But they couldn't string the two rods together. So I thought it would be rather nice, given the fact that the road is still there, albeit populated by large naked Germans, but in the winter it's not. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to go back? So I drove over there. I've got a friend who lives very close to the record road, and we drove down there, and we noticed there were quite a lot of speed cameras. So
dotted along.
Yeah,
so you could get, section timed.
Well,
in each section you could get timed.
It's more the fact you could get, in theory, get a speeding ticket at more than 100. It'd have to be more than 126 miles an hour. So you'd need a speeding ticket above 126 miles an hour in both directions, because there are cameras in both directions, within the hour. So you can get 2 speeding tickets within an hour.
And prove the French.
In excess of 126 miles an hour.
Prove the French. And see if it beats the Benz boys.
Well, in fairness, I think it's disproving popular history, because, of course, because it didn't actually get awarded the record, people ignore the fact it went fast enough. And then so in the 1950s, when Bill was writing about it, and other people wrote about it, they said, oh, well, of course it wasn't as fast as the Benz, because if it was, it would have broken the record. But it's much more complex than that. And it was faster than the Benz, a lot faster, but it wasn't given the opportunity to prove it. So officially. So I
think it's a great idea, and that's why I was laughing about it when I was doing my naughty course.
But the important thing is not to tell anybody. Well, I mean, I tell you. Well, they know, but I'll tell you when I'm going to do it. That's it.
Well, you need an empty bit of road. Now, we are running really behind, but...
That's not my fault, Lara.
No.
You keep wittering on. I try
I
and
can't get a word in edge.
Well, you say that.
So over my left shoulder, on stage right,
yes.
we have what you said a minute ago was your favourite car.
It is.
It's the Salson, and it's the steam car.
Coal-fired. The only coal-fired steam car still running, actually, I think.
Are you...
Not many.
It's an 1893.
Yes, well, this is a moot point with me. But
okay,
yes.
And...
people will go...
I see, okay.
No, not at all.
It takes 2 hours to warm up, to get ready.
Actually, I've got it down to fine art. There's a great friend of mine, Les and Dee Searle, who are legends in the sort of traction engine, the steam world. They have played with... I was doing everything wrong, basically, and Les and Dee have taught me that I can actually get steam up in about an hour.
So the 7:04 start at Hyde Park is now... You'd have to just get there for 6 rather than 5.
Well, I normally try and get there at 6 anyway, but I have to get up at 4:30, I suppose, to light the boiler, to be ready to leave, to be ready to go at 5:30.
And do you have
get round to the start for 6?
Do you have to fill water every 12 miles or something?
It depends. The first, I've managed to, again, it's refining it. The steam people will understand, but if it's all about tiny, tiny gains. And if you can save a little bit of steam here, save a little bit of water there. So I can now do about 15 miles. The first 15 miles I could do with the water.
And how fast do you go?
Oh, it's quite quick.
We're going from the fastest car sitting here to the slowest car sitting there?
It'll do 18 miles an hour, which is a...
And this is 126?
130.
130 to 18.
Yeah, but that's
perfect.
Old.
Absolutely perfect. And so, so when did you acquire this car?
I fell in love with it. I'm only the 4th owner in 131 years.
Oh, nice.
So I fell in love with that car. Henry Salson was the son of Christian Salson, who was a Dane who went to Scotland in the 1850s and established a shipbuilding company and shipping line. And I think people might have seen Christian Salson lorries on the motorway only up to sort of 15, 20 years ago. But Henry was his son, and he was just an enthusiastic engineer. And at the time, I think people don't realise there were quite a lot of steam-powered road vehicles on the road in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. And there was a very famous car built by a chap called Colonel Crompton, who was in an adjoining estate, a Scottish estate to the Salsons. And young Henry, I think, would have seen this Crompton car which is almost exactly the same as the Salson, and just thought, well, I can build one of those. I don't think he had any intention of selling them. He had no intention of using them particularly. It was just a hobby. Like, if you're interested in space travel, you might build a rocket in your shed. I think it was simple as that. And so he had access to the shipyard. The shipyard made the components of the car, and he designed them all, and he took them home to his stately home in Falkirk and assembled them all. And I think he had great fun. But when he, within, this is where there's not controversy, this is where the sort of dating thing is a bit of a shame. Because in 1893, when he built the car, it was, coal-fired steam was 50-year-old technology. And it was the go-to thing if you wanted to make a road locomotive. But within a very short period of time, 2 or 3 years, petrol had really been established in Germany and France.
And I was just thinking that Henry Ford made a locomobile, didn't he, in 1899 or something, 1895 or something?
There were quite a lot of experiments all over the world.
And he was also mixing his designs with combustion as well.
I think lots of people, there was a whole load of experiments, but petrol as a motive power was pretty much established one way or t'other by about 1894, 1895. And so in 1893, there wasn't, you're living in Scotland, you're building ships, coal-fired steam ships, you wouldn't even think of anything else. But the problem the Salson had when he built it was it had an axle that pivoted in the middle, a bit like a traction engine. So, because nobody had made an axle where the wheels turned, because horse-drawn carriages didn't need the wheels to turn. So it was a very unusual thing to have an axle where the wheels turned as opposed to the whole axle turning, just like a horse-drawn carriage. So when he built the car, it had an axle that turned like a traction engine or a horse-drawn carriage, but that made it almost undrivable. I mean, it would have been appalling. You couldn't control the car. So in 1896, Daimler had established itself in Coventry, and Henry corresponded with John Lawson, who had established the company, and bought an front axle, from Daimler, and fitted a Daimler axle to the car, because that gave him wheel steering. It gave him steering that would work. So, I mean, the dating committee are fine. I mean, I've accepted that, but it's a sort of shame because the whole car is 1893. The boiler is 1892. The back axle is 1892. The whole car was built in its entirety, by 1893. But the front axle was changed in 96 because it would have been undrivable, and that's the date.
So when did you acquire it?
Well, Henry used it by 1897. He bought a car, Daimler, so he pushed it in the back of his shed. I don't think he had ever intention of using it. And it went from him after he died to the sword collection. There was a crisp magnet in Glasgow. Crisp magnet. Anyway, a crisp manufacturer in Glasgow who just collected cars. He didn't do anything with them. He died in the 60s, and there was a very famous sale, 3-day auction, where all his cars were sold, and it was sold to another collector who didn't use his cars in Norfolk called George Milligan, and he did nothing with it at all until he died in 2004. So I fell in love with it in 2004. There was a Bonhams auction, and a great friend of mine bought the car, and I sort of was slightly jealous really because it was the London to Brighton run is a fantastic event. It's a really magical event. And it's why I sort of like the car more than everything else, because you can involve the whole family. Racing's quite antisocial because you're on your own, you go to drivers' briefings, you go to scrutineering, and all your family waits and hang around and sort of get bored. But the Salson, London's Brighton Run, everybody's on board. We have, it takes all day, everybody's got a job. So I fell in love with the car then because primitive cars are so exciting. As opposed, you can rattle to Brighton on a Didion Bouton
I've just
in a couple of hours.
My shoulders have just slumped because I'm trying to get the courage to say to you, can I get a hitch and lift to the London to Brighton and take photographs for you the whole day?
We
and
did
work.
a bit of a queue, but no, it's fine because it's fine. But it's a bit of a queue because I've got some friends who
been
also want to do
waiting
it.
for years.
A bit. We had some Huey Walker and a crew last year. We had 8 people on it last year, so it's quite a good thing. We took 6 to Brighton, and the last couple of miles we got 8 people on board to go over the line. Definitely, I'll let you know. Sadly, a little bit further down the list, but I'll let you know.
Good. I definitely want to. I've done the London to Brighton on Spiker and Genevieve.
Oh,
I was
right.
swapping over. I did it for the BBC, and I was photographing both, and I just thought, oh, when am I doing this again?
Well,
This
it's
is
good.
amazing.
And I mean, I don't sound disparaging at all. The London Brighton run is fabulous, but my passion is the really early stuff, because that's where I started with my father, and so there's absolutely nothing wrong. It doesn't sound rude, but it's magnificent going to Brighton in a I don't know, Renault or de Dion from 1903, 1904, but the car was fully formed by 1900, really, in my mind.
So it was easy, very easy.
Well, it's easy. It's still not easy, but you can trundle to Brighton pretty confidently in fairly luxurious leather buttons, Victorian finery, and arrive in Brighton and probably stop for lunch. Whereas there's something of there aren't many pre-1896 cars.
It's
ever.
quite raw, isn't it?
And it's a proper challenge. And if
Quite
we
raw.
get to Brighton by, say, 3 or 4 o'clock,
You deserve it.
Well, it's a tremendous sense of achievement, and I think is also. I was talking to somebody the other day who was a friend of mine who's driven the car, and we were chatting yesterday or the day before about in 1893, even 1896, there were no photographs in newspapers. So imagine, I can't imagine what it must have been like in Falkirk to see Henry rattling down the road, that thing, when you had no concept of a car, let alone what one might look like or sound like. So those are all the things that amuse me about it, I think.
We have to wrap up because we want to
go.
keep things short and sharp. But I want to ask just one last.
You can edit all this. You can edit it.
Edit it all out.
Edit it down to 2 minutes.
One last thing. So we know that at the Vintage Sports Car Club, there's so many youngsters that have joined, that are participating.
Like ourselves.
From a bit younger than us as well, though. That have either inherited cars or making use of all of the Austin 7s around, because they're so adaptable and easy and quite reasonably priced to get into motor racing. What would you say to these youngsters about being part of the VSCC, and would you say that they should be working on the cars and fettling them themselves, or do you think that they should just get on and drive? And what's your advice?
I think the VSCC is brilliant. I think there are many clubs in the UK, around the world, many car clubs, who should be really jealous of the Vintage Sports Car Club because of having anybody under the age of 85. It's astonishing. I think that all the clubs are dwindling in members. I mean, the Veteran Car Club, actually, the average age there is about 100. So it's fantastic the VSC have got such a thriving young group. And they aren't all sons and daughters of people who've got cars. Quite a lot of them are people who've got mates who are just interested in it. I think they all fettle their cars, and I think that's coming back to what I said at the beginning, where I started from, is understanding that encouraging people to build their own cars, because let's face it, you can't buy much these days. Even Austin 7s are out of the price bracket of most people. But there's lots of generosity from the older generation of the club to let people use cars. I've lent my cars to two young members, or two sons of people who wanted to drive a car. So I lent it to them for a couple of years. So there's that generosity of spirit from the older members. But I think the beauty there's the collection of young people who all get together. Young people, it sounds like some old man. But the youth in the VSCC all gather together and they support each other. So they'll do trips across France, they'll camp at Prescott in a couple of weeks' time. They'll get together and they'll work on their cars together. And there may only be 1 or 2 cars in a group of 10 or 15 of them, but they'll all work on it. And it's more the fact, the camaraderie of using the car to bring them together as a group than it is actually the racing, I would say, much more so. And that spirit to be encouraged by the VSCC, I think, is
long may it
brilliant.
continue.
Yeah, it's got to continue, I think, otherwise we're all doomed.
So this is coming out sort of around November, the autumn time, and we're in the celebration year of the VSCC. So I think we'll have seen you at...
Sounds a little bit sunburned from yesterday's Goodwood charity day.
So I think we would have seen you at Goodwood Revival and the London to Brighton run. And so good luck with everything, and I hope you did well. I'm sort of talking in the future, in the past, in the future, in the past.
Win all those.
So you're going to win all the races,
definitely.
get to Brighton without the rain hissing on you.
No, actually, the rain was good though. A friend of mine I chatted to yesterday, he was on that run, and he didn't come the next year. And I said, did you not come because of the drenched? And he said, no, we all really enjoyed that year, more than almost any other year, because it's so distinctly memorable being that fucking awful. Did I say fucking?
No.
Oh, anyway. So I should have said it twice. Anyway, we used to remember it being so awful because it was so wet that it was brilliant, bizarrely. So anyway.
Oh, well, let's lend it there in case you say anything else. Thank you, Duncan.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. We
Good.
could have talked for a lot longer, but I just want to try to keep them a bit short, so people
Yeah,
just
no,
want to, it's a tease.
Yeah.
A bit more.
Good.